Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another BHSA Coffee Chat. Today's guest is Samir Anand. Samir graduated from Temple in 2012 and is currently working as a Senior Director of Product Quality and Reliability at Comcast. Samir, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Great. So do you want to start by just telling us what you've been doing since you've been graduating? Since you
Yeah,
graduated?
for sure. So, yeah, like Kayla mentioned, I graduated in 2012. After graduation, I spent about 3 years working in Washington, D.C. for IBM. I was actually in the public sector, which was pretty cool. Got some eyes on some things. Got to spend some time in the Pentagon too, which was pretty sweet as a new hire and leaving the college space. It was like really eye opening. After that, I left DC to come back to Philly. Spent a little bit of time for a small consulting firm, which my first client was actually Comcast. And lucky for me, they offered me a full time role, and I've been there now for about 5 years in a full time capacity.
That is so cool that you started and you were just casually at the Pentagon. Are you kidding?
It, it was eye
So,
opening for sure.
like, I can't even fathom being in that position. But anyways, so now that you are with Comcast, can you run us through what your day to day looks like?
Yeah. So my job is my team and I's job, I should say, because there's a lot of people behind the scenes that go into our success. But like, we really just try to make sure the stuff we do works, right? So like, I think we all know we're sitting here on a Zoom meeting right now. Like, we're all hoping and have our fingers crossed that the internet doesn't go out. Like that's one of the
Mhm.
jobs that we do, right? So like, reliability, I think, has become more and more of a focus, especially like in a post-pandemic or current pandemic world, however you want to describe it. So that's one kind of portion of our job, making sure things work. And then the second piece is looking how we can get better, right? So um, we have pain points that I'm sure folks are aware of with their internet connectivity. We try to find opportunities to sell towards our product teams to start drafting ideas and solutions for. So the things that we do are like very data heavy. Like we look at reasons why people call or reasons why people chat with our agents, and then we try to correlate those with some of the machine metrics that we have from our systems and find opportunities so that we can continue to get better.
Sounds really interesting. You talked about how you worked at a bunch of different companies so far. I know you're currently working at Comcast, but you worked for IBM. When you interned, I saw at JP Morgan as well. So, like, out of all the different companies you've worked with, have you noticed anything that's really different or really similar between like the company culture or some of your roles so far?
Yeah, it's a really good question because like I've been fortunate enough to have a lot of different opportunities and see different things. Um, the one thing that I'll say has different, and this could just be like time, as I've had in my career, like the work culture is definitely shifting, right? So like I'm talking to you guys here from my home, right? And yeah, the pandemic had a lot to do with that, but like also like in some of my previous roles, like they weren't really open to that. So I think culture has definitely shifted, and I think it's a benefit to workers in general. People are becoming more flexible, and they're going to need to attract the top talent, right? Like I think that kind of is going to be really important for the future, right? Like there's going to be more, I think, leverage on the side of workers in the future for things like, hey, like I want to have a little bit more of a flexible schedule, or like, hey, maybe I don't want to come into the office. I think that's definitely been a shift. Outside of that, like I think with some of like I've been exposed to a lot of larger companies. Even larger companies, I think, have different cultures in of themselves. When I was interning at JP Morgan, I had to wear a tie every day, right? Like when I was with IBM, I mentioned I was at Pentagon. Like I had to go buy 3 suits to make sure that I looked okay in front of clients and those type of things. With Comcast, even when I started, the culture was just definitely a little bit different. Like I don't have to tuck in my shirt anymore. Like that's a big deal to me personally, just because the way I work, right? So I think, like I said, that has a little bit to do with like work culture and time, but I also think it's an advantage to the worker as we move forward.
Makes sense.
I definitely understand the comfortability with not having to tuck your shirt in. I just started a internship and I had to get all these work clothes and I had no idea what I was doing. And then I came one day with jeans on and they're like, yeah, you can't do that. And I was like, oh my gosh. So it's definitely varies from place to place, but I totally understand. So now we kind of want to transition to the temple aspect of things. So do you want to first tell us what your major of MIS translated to how you work today?
Yeah, that's a really good question because like um I've also been fortunate enough to recently hire a few folks, and like the one thing that I've like been able to understand, like my time at Temple, like sitting in classrooms and stuff like that, sometimes you don't realize until you're in the workplace, like some of the actual things you're taught, and it could be really basic things, like are prepping you for your career. Like I've had people come in and ask me about like how to do certain things, or like what would be the best way to approach certain analyses. And I just felt like my time at Temple actually prepared me for that. Like some of the like questions that you should be asking when you're looking at things like data sets, or a thing like that. I think I was prepped really well at Temple, to be honest. And I don't think I knew that until like more recently in my career. Like when I was sitting in the classroom, I was like, I just need to figure this out or learn this so that I can answer the question on a test or something like that. A few years later, after you actually get your feet settled into your career, I think like, yeah, like that was helpful. I'm glad I listened. So that has definitely been like a few like distinct times where I'm like, man, like I'm glad I heard or knew about this. Like even if it's just like an anecdote from a professor, like I can tell you I have a few anecdotes that I remember from professors for sure at my time at Temple. And I'm like, man, that was really helpful. I'm glad they told me this story about this company at that period of time. So I think stuff like that like has definitely resonated with me.
Yeah, I definitely think Fox does a really good job at giving you a well-rounded education, and I've heard that from a lot of alumni so far. Is like even some of the like other business core courses that like don't specifically pertain to your major, they don't realize how much it actually like impacts their job until a lot later. But going a little bit further into that, especially with the honors program, are there any like honors professors or honors classes that you had, especially within Fox Honors, that like stand out to you in your memory? Or any people you want to give a shout out to?
Oh man, putting me on the spot here for sure. So I do remember my MIS courses with Professor Doyle. I definitely remember those courses, and I definitely remember like I talk about anecdotes and talking about like examples from business. There are a few there that I definitely remember. I remember like my SQL courses when I was like, man, when am I ever going to use this querying language ever in application? And I'm like now thinking like, man, it's great that I understand some of these things so that I can talk with some of my developers. I also like remember like a bunch of the, like you said, like maybe the non-major courses, right? Like I remember sitting through accounting. I'm like, man, this is like something I'm never gonna do. But like then you're in a position in your career where you're hiring someone, and you're like, oh, it's a good thing I know the difference between capex and opex, like those type of things. So it's really interesting you mentioned like you're taking a bunch of courses in your major, but one of the advantages of Fox that I remember is you have to go through things like I think managerial, financial accounting. I think I took a stat for business course with Professor Kapanji way back when. Oh man, I feel like I'm dating myself. But like those type of things, like I definitely remember, and like it's coming up for me on my 10-year anniversary. And the fact that I can still name some of these things, I think speaks volumes to the fact that like my education put me in a place to succeed.
It's actually so funny. So I have Professor Doyle right now. I absolutely love him. Everyone watching, if you have the chance, take MIS 2901 with Mart Doyle. He is amazing. He is so funny. And I think it's hilarious. I'm taking financial accounting right now as well as stat. So everything you just said pretty much resonates with me. And I agree with everything you said. So that's just such a coincidence. But, anyways, so besides professors and memories of classes, things like that, is there any advice that you would like to give current students that you wish you had while you were a Temple student?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. Yesterday, actually no, today, yes, yesterday, my wife and I were actually on campus for the first time in like 5 years. My
Oh,
wife and I met at Temple our senior year, and we're coming up on our third wedding anniversary next week. So we were both just happened to be in the neighborhood and we were walking around. And one of the things we actually both mentioned is like the time goes really fast. Like it it feels like 4 years would be a really long time, but the time goes really fast. So other than us being shocked at the number of new buildings that have popped up, that was the other thing that like we definitely were remembering, right? So like I think what that means for us, like, yes, socially and those type of things, take advantage of all those situations. But like also while you're sitting through these classes, like I remember trying to figure out, okay, what does this really mean to my future and my career? And it doesn't always readily make that connection. But then like I was saying before, as you're retrospecting a few years from now, there's certain things that are going to stick with you. And I think like being able to soak those things up as much as you can are really important to set you on the right path for your career. So that's definitely one piece. And then the second piece I think that I benefited from was we always talk about networking and like it's so important to network, but like all networking really means is just being available for conversations and having conversations with people, right? Like there's really not much to a formality in my personal opinion to networking. Like even if it's just like having conversations with your professors or having conversations with other people, and like remembering and soaking up some of those things, like I think it's important. You never know in your future when you're going to cross paths with other people. It's happened to me a lot. I've been able to make connections with people who I haven't talked to since college, right? But the fact that like I remember chatting with them in college gives me an opportunity to start that conversation. So I think those are the kind of the two big pieces. The last piece, just enjoy yourself and have a good time, right? Like that I think it is really important. I think not only is college good educationally, but it's also just a personal bridge to the rest of your life.
Yeah, I think it's definitely really easy to resonate with that advice. Especially when I was hearing like your first point, I remember like even right now I'm taking a class that I would consider like not that important, or at least it's difficult for me to see the importance of it. And I'm like sitting here talking to my friends like this class is useless. There's always one person in the class who's like, when are we going to use this in real life? And like just the other day, I was having like a conversation over dinner with someone, and one of the things that we talked about in that class, like took up a majority of the conversation at dinner. So even if like it's not something that I'm going to be like discussing at my internship right now or like at a full-time job, there's like little tidbits of information you never know when it'll pop up in like advanced opportunity to network or give a little bit of extra oomph to a conversation that you wouldn't have had otherwise. So definitely resonate with your advice there.
all right. Well, that's pretty much it. That's all of our questions. So thank you so much for coming today. You were a great little coffee chat. Thank you so much.
Of course, thanks everybody.
Yep.
Thank you.
Here. I'm trying to. I'll just deal with stopping the recording.